When I walked into my district manager's office and saw the woman from the parking lot sitting across from his desk. Not in the oversized rain jacket and muddy sneakers I remembered, but in a charcoal blazer with a corporate badge on a lanyard around her neck. I actually forgot how to close the door behind me. My hand was still on the handle. She looked at me the same way she had 6 weeks earlier, standing next to a shopping cart in the rain with her wallet open and nothing useful inside it. Calm, patient. Like she had been expecting me. My district manager looked up from his desk and said, "Come on in, Lee. Close the door." I did. But my legs had a different idea about how quickly we were going to get there. Let me start over. I had been with the company for 14 months when this happened, which meant I had learned exactly two things. How to smile when the regional numbers came in bad, and how to pretend I wasn't exhausted in every meeting after 3 p.m. I was an assistant store manager at a home goods retailer in suburban Ohio, one of those mid-sized chains that sells candles and throw pillows and kitchen gadgets that people buy with confidence and return 2 weeks later without explanation. The store was a good store, solid team, decent foot traffic, a break room that smelled faintly of someone's microwaved fish, but was otherwise survivable. My direct supervisor, I'll call him my store manager because that's what he was, had been in the role for 9 years and had opinions about everything. The floor layout, the way associates greeted customers, the font size on the weekly schedule. He had a particular way of delivering feedback in front of the team, not loud, never loud, but pointed in the specific way that makes sure everyone in earshot understands is being found lacking. He'd done it to me twice in my first month, once about a planogram I'd executed wrong, and once about a markdown I'd approved without double-checking the system. Both times, he'd said my name first, let the silence sit, and then explained what I had missed in the tone of a man who had never once missed anything himself. I started writing things down after that. Not a journal, exactly. A running list in the Notes app on my phone of everything I wasn't sure about, everything I needed to know before he asked me in front of someone else. It is not a great way to live, but it is effective, and I was too new to know whether what he was doing was normal or whether normal had just been redefined for me without my consent. That particular Tuesday in October, I was running on 5 hours of sleep and a gas station coffee that had gone cold somewhere around the highway exit. We had a seasonal reset starting Thursday, which meant 2 days of prep work and a floor crew that was already stretched thin from a call-out the night before. I was not in the mood for anything that required emotional generosity. I was in the mood to get through the day and go home and eat cereal for dinner, and not explain myself to anyone. I stopped at the grocery store on my way in. The big one near the interstate, the kind with self-checkout lanes that are always half broken, and an express lane that moves slower than every other lane for reasons no one has ever explained. I needed lunch food, coffee creamer, and maybe something that resembled a vegetable. I had exactly 17 minutes before I had to be at the store. I was in the express lane, scanning my items, when I noticed the woman in line behind me. She was maybe 60, 65, the kind of age that's hard to place exactly, with silver hair pulled back in a practical knot and a rain jacket that had seen better seasons. She had a basket with a few things in it. Bread, a container of soup, a small bunch of bananas. Not much. I finished scanning, tapped my card, got the little green check mark. I was reaching for my bag when I heard the self-checkout machine behind me make the particular flat beeping sound that means declined. I looked over because I couldn't help it. The woman was standing at the screen with her card in her hand, not panicked, but with the particular stillness of someone who is working very hard to appear calm. She tapped the card again, same sound. A store attendant came over, the teenager who'd been monitoring the self-checkout area and looked like he would rather be anywhere else on earth. He checked the screen and said, "It's not going through. You want to try a different card?" The woman opened her wallet. She looked through it with the careful patience of someone who already knows what she's going to find, or not find. "I think I may have left my other card at home," she said. Her voice was steady, but her jaw was set in the way that means the steadiness is costing something. The attendant glanced at the line forming behind her. There were 3 people now. He said, "I can void the transaction if you want to come back." I was already going to be late. My store manager would notice, because he noticed everything, and I would get the measured look that said he'd clocked it and was storing it away for later. I had exactly enough time to get back in my car and get to work and not have that conversation. I said, "How much is it?" The attendant looked at me. The woman looked at me. The screen said $14.83 $10. I pulled my card back out of my wallet and tapped it on her machine before I had fully thought the sentence through. The green checkmark appeared again. The woman turned to face me completely. She had brown eyes and a particular expression I have a hard time describing. Not surprised, exactly, more like she was taking a quiet measure of something. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "It's soup and bananas," I said. "Please don't worry about it." She looked at me for a moment that lasted longer than most moments in grocery store express lanes. Then she said, "Thank you," in a way that was deliberate enough to make me feel like I should write it down. I grabbed my bags and went to work and was 4 minutes late, and my store manager did notice, and I got the look, and I told myself the look was survivable because I had decided a long time ago that I was not going to be the kind of person who let the look change what I did when nobody was keeping score. The rest of that Tuesday was the kind of day that makes you question every career decision you've made since college. We had a shipment arrive with 3 pallets labeled incorrectly, a register go down for 2 hours during peak afternoon traffic, and a customer complaint that escalated to corporate because my store manager had stepped out and I had handled it myself in the way I thought was reasonable and professional, which apparently was not the way it was supposed to be handled, though the policy on this was not written anywhere that I had ever been able to find. My store manager called me into his office at the end of my shift. He had a printed copy of the customer complaint email. He had highlighted 2 sentences. He set it on the desk between us and waited for me to read it before he said anything, which is a technique that is designed to make you feel like the words are already decided, and you are just being given the courtesy of knowing what they are first. He said I had offered the customer a resolution that was outside standard protocol. He said that in the future I should escalate rather than resolve. He said this calmly, reasonably, in the tone of a man explaining something obvious to someone who should already know it. I said I understood. I went home. I looked up the policy for the 4th time. It was, as I had suspected, not clear. The weeks after that settled into a pattern I was starting to recognize. I came in early. I documented everything. I asked questions in advance instead of after the fact, and was careful about which questions I asked in front of whom. My store manager had a gift for finding the one thing I hadn't prepared for, and he used it with a precision that felt almost practiced. Not malicious exactly, but automatic, like he had been trained to correct that way and had never been given any reason to question whether training was producing the thing it was supposed to produce. I started keeping a second list, not just what I didn't know, what I had done right, with dates, because I had the feeling I was going to need it eventually, and I was right, though not in the way I expected. About 5 weeks after the grocery store, I was covering a Wednesday morning shift when I looked up from the floor plan I was adjusting and saw the woman from the express lane standing near the front entrance. She was not in the rain jacket this time. She was wearing a wool coat, professional, and talking to our regional visual coordinator in the quiet, focused way that people talk when one of them is taking notes internally. The regional visual coordinator was nodding carefully, not the nodding of someone waiting for their turn to speak, the nodding of someone listening to a person they want to make sure they understand correctly. The woman glanced toward the floor and saw me before I could decide what to do with my face. She gave me a small nod, unhurried. The same quality of attention she'd had in the grocery store, like she had exactly the time. I smiled back. I kept working, but I thought about it for the rest of the shift, not obsessively, just in the background, The way you turn something over without meaning to when it doesn't quite fit the shape of everything around it. The next morning, my store manager told me the district manager wanted to see me. His name was, well, his name doesn't matter as much as the fact that he had been district manager for 7 years and had a reputation for being direct in a way that people in corporate retail sometimes mean as a compliment and sometimes mean as a warning. In my experience, both were true. He did not call assistant managers into his office for small things. When he did call you in, it was either because something had gone very wrong or something was about to change significantly, and there was not a great deal of middle ground. I knocked. He told me to come in. I opened the door and saw the woman in the wool coat sitting in the chair across from his desk, with a lanyard and a corporate badge that I had to read twice before I was sure I had understood it. She was from the company's organizational development division. She had spent 30 years in retail operations, district and regional leadership, then 18 years consulting internally and externally on what she called the gap between the values a company prints on a wall and the values it actually practices. She had been brought in by the company's senior vice president of operations to conduct a 12-week assessment of 12 stores across 3 regions before a decision was made about a new regional director position. She had not introduced herself when she arrived. That was intentional. I sat down across from her and my district manager and worked through the information in the careful, methodical way you process things when your brain is trying to make sure it hasn't made an error. "I want to be straightforward with you," she said, "because I think that's more useful than the alternative." She had a way of speaking that felt chosen without feeling performed, every word placed deliberately but without the weight of effort. "I've spent 11 weeks visiting stores in this region. I've walked floors, sat in on team meetings, watched how managers interact with their teams in the ordinary moments and in the stressful ones." She paused. "I do some of my best observation in grocery stores." She looked at me with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was not far from one. "The morning in the parking lot," I said, because I had just remembered that her rain jacket had been wet when she came in, which meant she had walked from the parking lot in the rain, which meant she had not driven directly to the door. "You weren't parked close." She tilted her head slightly. "I wasn't parked there at all. I was walking from the coffee shop across the street. I do that sometimes. I like to arrive at things without a car." I thought about that. "The card," I said. She folded her hands on her knee. "I have never once left my wallet at home in 47 years of grocery shopping," she said, and this time what was around her eyes was unmistakably amusement. "What I have done is stood at a checkout counter and waited to see what the person behind me does. Most mornings, they look at their phones." My district manager was watching me with the expression of someone who already knew the shape of this conversation and was present to observe how I handled being inside it. "I also observed store operations during my visits," she said, and her tone shifted slightly. "Careful without becoming hard. There are things that become invisible when they've been in place long enough. Management styles that were perhaps effective in a different kind of workplace, under a different set of assumptions about what accountability looks like, and what fear looks like, and whether those two things are the same." She picked up a folder from the corner of the desk and held it without opening it. "They are not the same." She looked at me steadily. "I read the customer complaint from 6 weeks ago, the one that was escalated." My stomach moved. "I also read your incident report, which you filed the same afternoon, and I pulled the policy documentation you were operating under." She set the folder back down. "You handled that situation correctly. The policy, as written, supported your resolution. What it did not support was the version of events that was communicated up the chain." The room was quiet in the particular way. Rooms get quiet when something true has just been said out loud in a space that wasn't expecting it. "I want to be clear about what this meeting is and is not," she said. "It is not a grievance process. That is a separate conversation that involves different people and different timelines. What this meeting is is me speaking to you directly because I watched how you conducted yourself over the past 11 weeks, and I wanted you to hear certain things from a person rather than from an email. I thought about my two lists, the things I didn't know, the things I had done right with dates. You didn't shrink, she said. Some people do. It's understandable. It's the path of least resistance, and it doesn't mean anything permanent about who they are. But you didn't. You got more careful and more thorough and more precise, and that is a different thing entirely from getting small. I realized my hands were in my lap and I was pressing them together harder than I intended. The grocery store, I said. I want to be honest with you. I wasn't trying to make an impression. I wasn't thinking about anything except that I was going to be late and the transaction needed to resolve itself so I could leave. She nodded once. I know, she said. That's the part that told me something. My district manager spoke for the first time since I'd sat down. We're not asking you to make any decisions today. No action is required from you right now. He had a folder of his own, closed, in front of him. What I can tell you is that there are structural conversations happening at the regional level about supervision and accountability, and about what we want the management culture in this district to look like going forward. Those conversations are in progress. She looked at me with the same steady attention she'd had at the checkout counter. The changes that are coming are not because of you, and you don't need to carry the weight of them, but you should know they're coming. And you should know that what I observed in this store was part of why they're necessary. I walked out of that office at 11:15 on a Wednesday morning and stood in the hallway for a moment and then went back to the floor because we had a seasonal reset in 36 hours and the planogram wasn't going to execute itself. My closing supervisor found me in the stockroom at 2 o'clock, same as most days when I was covering a mid. She set a coffee on the shelf next to my clipboard without saying anything, which is how I knew she'd either heard something or was paying a different kind of attention than usual. Everything okay? She said. I told her about the meeting the way you tell someone about something that doesn't quite feel real yet, in pieces and out of order. Watching their face to see if the sequence makes more sense to someone, hearing it for the first time than it does to you. She listened without interrupting, which is one of her better qualities. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "The soup and bananas." "The soufas," I said. "You paid $15 for a stranger's groceries, and she turned out to be the person evaluating the entire region." $14.83, I said. "And yes, she thought about this. I was in that grocery store," she said. "The same week, I was at the self-checkout at like 8 in the morning and I didn't look up once." She paused. "I want to be the kind of person who looks up." "You would have," I said. "I don't know," she said. "I really don't." I thought about that. I thought about how many mornings I had also not looked up. I thought about what had been different about that Tuesday, the tiredness, the low-grade dread of the day ahead, the particular quality of exhaustion that is actually too tired to construct an excuse fast enough to use it. The woman's jaw had been set in a way I recognized, and I had not been able to talk myself out of caring about it before my hands had already made a decision. I don't think it was virtue, exactly. I think it was exhaustion in the service of decency, which might be the most honest thing I have ever said about myself. The seasonal reset came and went. My store manager ran it the way he always ran things, with a particular standard for every detail and a particular silence for every deviation. But I stood in the middle of the floor on Thursday morning and answered his questions and looked at him and thought about what she had said, about the distance between accountability and fear, about how those two things can look identical from the outside for years until someone measures what they actually produce. I thought about the policy document I had read 4 times. I thought about the incident report I had filed the same afternoon, the one she had pulled and read. I thought about the fact that I had filed it not because I thought anyone would read it, but because it felt like the correct thing to do with information that was accurate. and that it had sat in a system somewhere for 6 weeks waiting to matter to someone. It mattered. 2 months later, there was a company-wide email about changes to the regional supervision structure. It was written in the careful institutional language that makes everything sound like a scheduled update, but anyone who had been paying attention could read what was underneath the language. New observation protocols, a revised feedback and accountability framework, a regional director appointment that would be announced at the next district leadership meeting. My closing supervisor forwarded it to me with no message attached, just forwarded. The regional director announcement came on a Friday morning, posted to the company intranet in the way that significant things are sometimes posted in quiet places with no fanfare. A brief biography, 30 years in operations, 18 years of internal consulting work, areas of focus that included organizational culture and training pipeline development, and the gap, as it was described in careful corporate language, between stated values and practiced ones. There was a photograph, the same steady expression, the same quality of attention that had been present at a grocery store checkout counter at 8 in the morning on a Tuesday in October. I read the announcement twice, sitting in the break room before my shift started, with a coffee I had made myself because the machine had been broken for 3 days, and someone had finally brought in a French press from home. My December floor supervisor was different from my store manager, a woman named, well, what matters is the way she ran things, pre-shift check-ins, where she asked not just whether we were ready, but whether we needed anything we didn't have yet. Shift debriefs, where she said, here's what worked, and here's what we'll do differently, without a highlighted printout in sight. She said, I don't know when she didn't know, and when I said I don't know in her presence, she said, good, let's find out. And then we did. Working under her felt like what working was supposed to feel like, I thought. Like practice, not like a trial. I kept my 2 lists, not because I needed them the way I had, but because the habits had become useful independent of the circumstances that had created them. Writing things down, staying with the questions, not letting the things I was uncertain about settle into the corners where they'd accumulate. On a Wednesday morning in January, I ran into her in the coffee shop across the street from the store. She was at the counter, waiting for something, in the same wool coat, no corporate badge this time. She saw me before I had fully decided what to do with the moment. Good morning, she said. How are things? I told her things were different, in the good way. She nodded. Good, she said. And she meant it the way people mean things when they don't have any reason left to say them for effect. I got my coffee and walked back across the parking lot in the January cold, and for a few minutes I just thought about the version of that October morning where I had looked at my watch and done the math on being 4 minutes later and decided it wasn't worth it. That version existed. It was not a far-off version. It was, honestly, closer to what I would have expected of myself. I think there are mornings when we are not our best selves, and we know it, and we accept it as the cost of being a person with a job and a commute and a list of things that have to get done before 8 a.m. And I think there are mornings when the exhaustion is deep enough that the calculation shorts out before it finishes, and you just do the thing because your hands get there before your reasons do. I don't think I was particularly virtuous that morning. I think I was tired in a specific way, and the woman's jaw was set in a specific way, and my brain didn't complete the sentence fast enough to stop my card from tapping. But it landed somewhere. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the $14.83. Not the outcome of it, the meeting, the changes, the email on a Friday morning, but the fact that something small, done without an audience, without a thought for what it would or wouldn't produce, landed in a record somewhere, not a database, not a file, in a person who was paying attention the way people pay attention when they are doing it on purpose. I go back to that sometimes, to the idea that ordinary moments are being observed, not always by someone with a badge, not always by someone who has any power to change anything, but observed nonetheless. By the person behind you in line, by the new employee watching how you handle the bad shift, by the intern who is trying to figure out what this job actually asks of a person when no one is grading the answer. You find out what you are in those moments, which is a different thing from who you are trying to be. That Tuesday morning in October, I wasn't trying to be anything. I was trying to get to work on time and get through a day I was already dreading and eat something that wasn't granola bar dust at 11 p.m. The woman's jaw was set and it bothered me, and I was too tired to pretend it didn't. That was it. That was the whole thing. Sometimes that's enough to matter to someone who is keeping a different kind of score than you knew anyone was keeping.